comes out of a rain cloud, and it's only about 2.5 miles in diameter or smaller. So it's not going to cover a huge amount of area. But again, 2.5 miles in diameter, that's still fairly big, but certainly compared to a big downburst, it is much smaller. And again, winds can be more than 100 miles an hour up to 150 miles an hour. A lot of times, damage is with a tornado, it's more of a swirling motion, right? So it's swirling. So they'll notice when they see a bunch of trees that were damaged, they'll see a bunch of trees push this way, then that way, then that way, then that way, then that way. So it almost goes in that tornado fashion. Whereas with downbursts, the winds come down and kind of fan out. So you can almost look at the direction the trees are falling to determine what kind of system touched down. There are a couple different types of microbursts. There's what we call dry microbursts, and we have wet microbursts. Here in Georgia, we normally see wet microbursts, which means basically there's rain associated with the microburst. And as it comes down, not only do you have an intense pushing and falling of winds, but you also have an intense gush of water. So those are dry or wet microbursts. There's also dry microbursts, and those are the ones you get really good footage of out west where it's very dry, and it happens in arid regions. And with a dry microburst, it just means that the rain associated with the microburst evaporates before the downdraft reaches the ground. So it evaporates up in the sky. So by the time it gets down, you still see the winds, but you don't see all the rain associated with it. So there's wet microbursts, there's dry microbursts. Here in Georgia, we normally see wet microbursts because we have a very humid, wet climate. So that's what we tend to see here in Georgia. Let me see if I'm missing anything. We see our microbursts mainly in the summer months. So here in Georgia, we see them in the summer months when it's really humid, the air is very saturated. And we're going to talk a little bit about this a little more, but it's very dangerous for airplanes. That's actually one of the most dangerous things for airplanes, because if an airplane is flying and all of a sudden you have this huge gush and force of air coming down on an airplane, certainly it can mess with the pilot and with the airplane. Now airplanes have sensors on them. They actually have 2 sensors on them to detect a change in wind speed. So over the past 20 years, there have actually been no airplane accidents from US commercial airliners because of microbursts. The technology has just come along so much that the airlines, the pilots, can detect those microbursts as they're flying in the air. So that's how passengers are kept safe. But more than 20 years ago, this used to be a big problem for pilots because microbursts happen suddenly. And a lot of times they're undetectable until they're actually happening. You can't really forecast a microburst is about to happen, but as meteorologists, we can look at the weather and we can tell you that is more likely in a certain environment or less likely in a certain environment. Let's see. So again, what causes a microburst? Yesterday, I'm trying to remember what days yesterday was like a couple days ago when we talked about hail. Remember we talked about the updraft, and in an updraft, you have hailstones that form and they get sucked up in the updraft and then they start to come down, then they suck up and they come down. This is similar to the updraft, but it's actually the downdraft. It's the energy coming down from the cloud. And it basically happens when the storm can no longer hold all of those large pieces of hail and rain. They're just too heavy. And as a result, the core of that plummets to the ground, and it happens very quickly and very intensely, which is why you get those 100 to up to 150 mile an hour winds. So let's flip this over. I know it's way more understandable when you're looking at these really cool pictures and graphics instead of just a talking head. So let's flip this around for you so we can talk about the world of weather. Today we're talking about, what are we talking about? Do you know? Microbursts. Microbursts in today's world of weather. So what is a microburst? We talked about this a little bit. It happens in a rain cloud. And basically you have a big column of air that cools and falls and it accelerates. So it happens very, very fast. It happens in thunderstorm clouds and the air plummets very quickly and very forcefully. And once it does, it fans out in all directions. So here you can see those intense winds. They descend from the rain cloud, they hit the ground and they fall out horizontally. As I said, they're short-lived, 5 to 10 minutes. They're less than 2.5 miles in diameter, and they can have winds as strong as 100, even up to 150 miles an hour. And a lot of times microburst damage is very similar to tornado damage. So again, homes can be destroyed. You're talking about 100-mile-an-hour winds. That's easily can destroy some homes, mobile homes, cars, trees. So a lot of times people assume that a microburst was a tornado when in fact it was a microburst, and they sound the same. They both sound like a freight train. So those intense winds sound very similar from a tornado and a microburst. Now, we talked about airplanes, and this is why it's so dangerous for airplanes. This gives you, so an airplane, and it's especially dangerous at takeoff and landing. That's when microbursts are going to affect airplanes, because again, most of the time airplanes are flying above the storm clouds. They're not flying in the middle of the storm clouds where we see a microburst. So takeoff and landing is when airplanes are affected by microbursts. And this graphic explains why. Again, a microburst is a sudden change in wind direction and speed, which is basically wind shear. So it's very dangerous for planes at takeoff and landing because it's unexpected and it's a big shift from headwind to tailwind. So imagine an airplane is taking off here and it's expected to just keep going, but all of a sudden you have all this force pushing down on the airplane, and it's very sudden. So an airplane is not prepared. They're not expecting that microburst. So it is very dangerous for airplanes, but again, now we have a lot of technology, and that's something that the experts are watching for in the airplane control towers, those big towers you see on your Hartsfield-Jackson. We have that big tower. There are meteorologists who work at the airport, and that is their job. They are looking for thunderstorms and microbursts to keep planes safe. And thankfully, we have a lot of technology now to help find these microbursts, and we even have technology on the actual airplanes. Now, microbursts are fairly hard to detect on radar ahead of time because they do happen so suddenly. We said they're short-lived, only about 5 to 10 minutes in length. So it is very difficult to give a warning for a microburst. A tornado happens, it's on the ground, we track it, and we can tell you it's coming. But a microburst is short-lived, and a lot of times the radar beam scans the sky every 5 minutes. So it could happen in the time that the radar beam has passed, and we miss it completely. But this is what it looks like on a radar beam. You see those reds and those greens, the change in direction in winds. So that's what you're looking at, green and red. So one color is winds going away from the radar, one is coming towards the radar site. So when you see greens and reds next to each other, it shows you a change in wind direction. So you can see what a microburst looks like on radar. This is what we look like, those reds and those greens. And that is what a microburst looks like. So today's trivia question, what type of microburst do we usually see in Georgia? A wet microburst, a dry microburst, neither or both? Do you guys know the answer? And the question is a wet microburst. And again, that's because we're in a really humid climate. We see it in the summer months. Dry microbursts, those happen where it's very arid in the desert or out west. So that's where they're going to see the dry microbursts. If you've ever seen images of a microburst, it's actually pretty fascinating to see because you see this big storm cloud and all of a sudden you just see this gush of air and rain coming out of it. Very similar to a tornado, but tornado has that rotation, whereas a microburst almost looks like a floodgate is opened on the cloud and just you see this huge release of incredibly strong winds and rain. So it really is an interesting phenomenon. Only happens with storm clouds. It does not happen on a beautiful sunny day. You have to have that really tall, powerful storm cloud. And again, it happens when all that energy is built up in the cloud and you have hail and condensation and rain, and all of a sudden it is released. It is too heavy to be up in the sky and it is released. I'm going to open you up here. I had you on the Facebook. And I'm going to see what kind of questions you guys have. Of course, it closed on me. But you guys have been so good lately. Let's see, where are we? That we haven't had a lot of questions, which is a good thing, right? I guess that means I'm answering all the questions as we go. So let's see. Very educational. What are the storm months in Georgia? Lucas, that is my son's name. Hi, Lucas. And you spell it like my son too. So we see storms, really you can see storms all year long. Our severe weather season is in the spring. So it's March, April, and May. That's when we have your springtime storms. That's when we get most of our tornadoes and our severe weather. And that is again, March, April, May. But in the summer, we see pop up, and we call them popcorn showers and storms, and those can be severe as well. And that's just from the heat and humidity. So it can be a nice day, and suddenly you get those thunderstorms with that heat and humidity. So we do see thunderstorms in the summer as well. And those are the ones you see when you're at the pool. A lot of times we're at the beach. They come suddenly and they go away suddenly. And then we have a secondary severe weather season in the fall as the temperatures start to change and those cold fronts start to come in again. So we have storms most of the year. But again, the peak of our storm season is going to be March, April, and May. And that's when we have the most tornadoes here in Georgia. Sunshine. Ralph, I love that you're getting sunshine. Yeah, it's looking good where I am too. Kind of like a wind bomb. Exactly. It's like a huge surge of wind coming down from the clouds, like a big fan coming down. Have there been microbursts in Georgia? Gerald is asking. Yes, actually we see them. We see them quite often. We see straight line winds, which we're going to have lessons on straight line winds. We see microbursts, downbursts, which a downburst and microburst, essentially the same thing. Microburst is just much smaller. But yes, we do see microbursts in Georgia. And I think that's all my questions. Monday. See, I've worked every weekend for the past two to 3 weeks. So my days are a little off kilter. So weather schedule. Let me see what we're talking about on Monday. I know I have it on here. This is all in real time. So my apologies. I've apparently sent way too many emails today. Okay. Oh, this is a great one. So Monday we're talking about severe thunderstorms, which is an important thing because microburst and severe thunderstorms are related, but they're different. So in a severe thunderstorm, you don't necessarily have microbursts, but microbursts come from severe thunderstorms. So we're going to be talking about severe thunderstorms and the criteria, because that's a question a lot of people ask me is, you know, especially this is a good example. Yesterday on Sunday, we had damage in Polk County in Northwest Georgia. We had a lot of trees down and people assumed it was a tornado, and it was not a tornado, but it wasn't even a microburst. It was actually, we had something called a wake low, where we had intense winds of about 25 to 45 miles an hour after the rain ended, and it caused some trees to come down. And it was not severe. People asked, did we have a severe thunderstorm warning for Polk County? No, there were no severe thunderstorms. So there is certain criteria that has to be met in order for a thunderstorm to be severe. You need winds of at least 60 miles an hour. So if it's not 60 miles an hour, it's not considered severe. Hail of 1 inch or bigger. So if it has half an inch hail, it is not severe. There's a criteria, and you only need to meet one of them. You don't need to meet all of them, but we're going to talk about that, what makes it severe, what criteria you need, and why sometimes we get damage even if it isn't severe. So make sure you join us on Monday for World of Weather. Everyone have a safe and happy weekend.